Because that's what I've learned through this journey, actually. I've accepted who I am a lot more. And I think that's what happens when you make work you care about. You resolve issues within yourself. I'm not beating myself up anymore. It's like a journey of self-discovery. And I think that's come about through doing the work.
If you lead an interesting life, good pictures will happen.
Oh, nice. You might well be my sexiest sounding guest.
Go somewhere you've never been before and take a camera.
We had this gorgeous Mediterranean light just flowing in.
Which Asda were you in?
Darfur.
Very nice.
Your first 10,000 pictures of your worst.
Let's sit down, let's have a cup of tea.
Welcome to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to another episode of the Standout Photography Show with me, Matthew Walker, where, as always, it is my honour and privilege to interview the finest working photographers in the world to unpack their systems, workflows, and find out what enables them to perform consistently at the very top of their profession. Before I introduce our guest today, this show is completely free, and that's how it will remain. Always. So, if you're enjoying listening to the greatest photographers in the world here at the Standout Photography Show, please support the show with your words, not your wallets. Many of our guests have extremely busy schedules, so your kind words really help us to attract the very best names in the business. It takes less than 30 seconds to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform, but like many things in life, it is these small moments that add up to make a big difference. If you've already left a review, thank you. If you haven't and you want to continue listening to the best in the business, remember, show your support with kind words, not lighter wallets. Thank you in advance. Let me introduce today's guest. My guest today is Abbie Trayler-Smith. On Instagram, that is at ABBIETS. Abbie is a self-taught documentary and portrait photographer. Abbie spent 8 years as a photographer with the Daily Telegraph newspaper, covering world events such as the Iraq War and the Asian tsunami, before deciding to go freelance in 2007. Abbie now works for a variety of clients, including Time Magazinbe, The Sunday Times, Marie Claire, Oxfam, Save the Children, and BBC Worldwide. In 2008, Abbie joined Panos Pictures, and the following year had her first major solo show, Still Human, Still Here, looking at the lives of failed asylum seekers at Host Gallery in London. Her portrait of Chelsea from her childhood obesity project, The Big O, won the 4th prize in the National Portrait Gallery's 2010 Taylor Wessing Prize. In 2014, she won a World Press Photo Award for her image of Shannon from the same project, and in the same year, she helped set up a Welsh photography collective, A Fine Beginning, which showcases photography created in Wales. Abbie is a photographer I've wanted to interview for a long, long time, and following numerous requests from both you guys and previous guests of the show, I was delighted when she agreed to come on and speak with us. During our conversation, we cover a wide variety of topics, including managing self-doubt, making lucky breaks, the key word there being making, not getting lucky breaks, delivering more than is asked of you, self-discovery in photography, building relationships with your subjects, connecting with personal projects, and finding your voice in photography. Please zone out from the world and enjoy my conversation with the delightful Abbie Trayler-Smith. And I will say, Abbie Trayler-Smith, thank you ever so much for coming on the show. Where in the world are we speaking to you today?
I'm in my home in Devon, in the rural Wild West is how I refer to it these days.
The rural Wild West. Now, before we came on air as well, you mentioned that you had an honesty shop opposite you. That is awfully British. I love that very much.
It's so funny. I do feel like I've got kind of queues for Harrods Food Hall outside because sort of like 3 people a day stop to buy eggs and jam. You know, it's all quite strange. But that's the only thing that's kind of changed in lockdown, although we now have a village community Facebook group, which is quite lovely. And everyone's, oh, this is so British, everyone's been offering each other jigsaw puzzles and cucumber plants and all this kind of stuff.
I think it's lovely. For listeners tuning into this, we're in week 15, I think, of UK lockdown, just for some context. And for all of the... Is that right, 15?
It is. I sort of lost track on about week 3, to be honest.
Yes.
But it's a kind of strange we're in a kind of weird... It's not quite lockdown, and yet it is still lockdown, but... it's kind of not. So it all feels quite odd at the moment, I think, more so than when we went into it initially.
Yeah, I think the unlocking is confusing, certainly for many areas of society.
Yes, I don't know how clear it actually is, though, what you there are kind of, I think there's room for manoeuvre. Why can't... I mean, the beach yesterday, the scenes from Bournemouth Beach were unbelievable, but then why shouldn't we be allowed to go to the beach? What we shouldn't be allowed to do is go to the beach and leave all our rubbish on the beach. Anyway, we're diverging from photography. Don't get me started on this.
Well, I tell you, we'll come on to politics when we finish. You're in that wonderful place in your career where... And I've noticed a lot of photographers I speak to, they have the same thing. Other people describe you and your work for you. And by that, I mean Wikipedia describe you as a Welsh documentary and portrait photographer who contributed to the Daily Telegraph for 8 years. But for anyone that is unfamiliar with you and your work, how do you describe yourself and your work as a photographer?
These days, I'm just a photographer. I don't really want to sort of broaden it out more than that. These days I feel like I'm creating work, I'm making work that's important to me with my camera, and that could be any different type of camera in any different way. So yeah, I didn't even know I had a wiki page until a few months ago, and a friend started taking the piss out of me for it. But it's quite odd to hear you sort of ask me that question. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm just like everyone else. I'm sort of, what's my next picture going to be? What's my next job going to be? Oh my God, it's all over. Even though I've been doing it for 20 years. So I think that's just because I love what I do so much that it doesn't feel like a job. It doesn't feel like something to be described. It's just my life. That's how it feels at the moment.
It's interesting to hear you say, you mentioned, is it all over? Even at this point in your career, do you still feel those insecurities? Absolutely.
And I don't know anyone who doesn't. And if they don't, then I don't think they're fully self-aware. I think that's part of being an artist, a photographer, a creator, a storyteller, whatever label you want to put on it, is that there's always an urge to keep making, isn't there? Keep doing what you're doing. And so it doesn't matter. And I was explaining this to someone the other day. It's kind of, when you start out, you think, oh my God, my dream would be to win a World Press Photo Award, or, to win a Lucy Award, or whatever your goal is, and then if you're lucky enough to maybe achieve that goal, you then immediately thinking about the next goal and the next project and what's the next body of work going to be. So I don't think any budding young photographers are going to think, you do think, oh, I'll get to that point and I'll relax, but it's not about relaxing. It's just about that kind of passion and that drive to kind of, it's just never enough.
It's really refreshing to hear you say that, and I think a lot of photographers, particularly like you say, young photographers, that will resonate with. Why photography? And I know that's extremely broad, but for example...
No, I know exactly why it's photography. And my parents both went to art college, and my mum was an art teacher. My dad made documentaries for TV, and I really wanted to go to art college because I loved painting and drawing. And then when my sister started painting and drawing, I realised I wasn't very good at it, and that's really come true in lockdown. So then I sort of got into photography, and I just fell in love with it. So it's just one of those things of you happen to find something you love at the right point in your life, and I just happened to find it really early. And in lockdown, I've kept a diary, and I've been doing felt tip pen drawings on Zoom with my sister. We've been drawing each other when we've been having Zoom sessions. And it just reminded me why I took up photography, because I was so crap at drawing, even though I've loved it. And I've really enjoyed doing all my felt tip pen drawings with my sister on her kids on Zoom over lockdown. But it was just that's why I took up photography. And there's something so there's such a hit when you, and it doesn't happen very often, but when a picture finds you, it's an incredible moment. And when you just know that I don't know if this makes sense, but sometimes I feel like the amazing pictures find me, and when you catch one, there's no better feeling in the world. So I guess that's something about photography. It's like you can just sort of, it's that instant thing, even though it requires sort of thought and depth and research and all the rest of it.
You mentioned two things there which I'd like to journey back on. You mentioned photographs and images finding you. Can you give us an example of one of those images? Yeah,
I think one that's really a standout image is a shot I took in Iraq in 2017 or 18 of a girl arriving to a refugee camp on a bus, sort of straight from the battle in Mosul, as the coalition were kind of pushing ISIS out. And I was at a refugee camp. There were all these buses arriving. There was chaos. And I was taking lots of pictures. Like, there were so many things happening. I sort of felt like the camera was going off left, right and centre. And then it all kind of, everything went into slow motion. And I saw her arrive and I saw her face. And there was the picture. And I just took the picture and it went very zen and very calm. And I knew it was an important picture when I took it. And it did, it's kind of been very well received and reacted to. But I just felt like that picture found me, because I was in the zone. I was giving myself over to the process and immersing myself in the environment and the story and the energy and all the rest of it. And that's happened to me like a number of times, where you get in the zone and then suddenly you see the pictures, basically.
I'm pleased you mentioned your work in journalism, because that's something we're going to touch on a little bit later on. The other thing I just wanted to journey back on, you said that photography found you quite early, and I think there's a lot of pressure for young people and it's from adults saying, what do you want to do? And a lot of people don't know what they want to do. Do you remember the spark when you realised that photography was something you really wanted to explore?
Yeah, I went off to college to study law, because I thought, that might be also, I didn't know photography was something you could do as a job. It was something that I enjoyed. I did a GCSE in it at school. I really enjoyed it. I wanted to go to art college, went off to do my law degree and needed like a creative outlet. And I got involved in the student newspaper. And that's when my spark kicked in, when basically I didn't want to go to lectures, I didn't want to go out on the piss with people, I didn't want to do anything apart from be around my friends at the student newspaper, other photographers, taking pictures, talking about photography. And that's when I just fell in love with it. And then I realised it was something you could earn money from, and that kind of came later. It was that kind of initial, God, I'm just obsessed with this. I even remember splitting up with a boyfriend because he was like complaining that I was too much time in the dark room, and I was just like, bye, so that was the moment. And I just think I was lucky, and I think if you are a young person and you don't know what you want to do, then you have to work backwards. You have to try everything and knock it off the list. It's like, what don't I work out what you don't want, and then you can get closer to what you do want. If you're not lucky enough to kind of find the thing that sparks you at a young age.
One of the questions I always like to ask is, has there ever been a sliding doors moment in your career where, had you made a different choice, your career and life could have looked very different? And I read a wonderful story on a website. Forgive me, I can't recall the website, but it said that you walked past a set of journalists at the launch to a new book about Princess Diana. Would you mind just talking us through what that was and the impact that it had?
So that was around that time. So around that time when I think I was in my second year of uni, and I discovered the student newspaper and we were all hanging out. The big Waterstones flagship store in Bloomsbury was right opposite the student newspaper offices. So I came out one day and there was a whole bunch of press photographers hanging around the shop, and I was like, oh my God, what's going on here? I'd never seen a bunch of press or anything like that happening. And basically it was for Andrew Morton's biography of Princess Diana to arrive in the bookstore, and I can't even remember why that would have been such a news event at the time, because there was like 20 photographers there, and when the van arrived with all the books, everyone started snapping. And in the meantime, I got chatting to a few of the photographers that were there, who then, whose numbers I then got, who then took me out in work experience. One of them I ended up falling in love with. I ended up meeting the people who that then introduced me to people at the Telegraph, who gave me my first gig. So that was the kind of pivotal moment where my passion then kind of fell into something much stronger. But it's curious because, like you were saying earlier about people feeling like the pressure to get in there young, I feel like I'm only just getting warmed up, and I've been doing it 20 years. So I sort of feel like my 10-year career in press photography, maybe if I'd bumped into a fashion photographer on the street, or, someone making a movie or that day, maybe that would have been my obsession or my route into, because I didn't know that photography comes in lots of genres. And do you know what I mean? That it's not just about being a photographer. There are lots of different genres you can work within that kind of. Anyway, I'm babbling on. That was the pivotal moment.
No, I do. I know exactly what you mean. And actually, you've touched on something else which I think is interesting. There are many, many avenues you can go down as a photographer in order to gain a career. So after that encounter, and you mentioned some of them, what practical steps did you take to begin your professional career as a photographer?
I think I contacted about 3 or 4 of the guys that I'd met that day and said, please, can I come out and basically shadow you for a day, and see what the job is and what you do. And then I did that a few times, and, became friendly with a couple of them, and and went out on lots of different days' work experience. And then one day I went along, like a few months later, by that point, I'd started dating one of the guys that I'd met, and I went on a job with him, and there wasn't anyone from the Telegraph there. So I phoned the Telegraph up, and he was like, oh, do you want to come and do this job with me? And I was like, so I phoned the Telegraph up and said, oh, you didn't have anyone there. Would you like these pictures? And that kind of then resulted in me working for them sort of 5 days a week, or when I left uni anyway. That wasn't straight away. When I left uni, that's right. This is in my 3rd year of uni. So when I finished my law degree, I thought I'll give myself a year to get work as a freelance photographer, earn some money. And if I can't make any money in that first year, then I'll go and I'll do my articles or finish my legal kind of path. I was sort of halfway down. But within a few months, I was working for the Telegraph. It was just right place, right time, like the Telegraph. Then after I sort of offered them pictures that day, I went in with a portfolio, and they didn't even really look at it. They just said, have you got a car? I didn't have a car. And
have you got a car?
I was like, yeah, I've got a car, thinking, oh my God, I've got to go and buy a car, because, you needed to be able to be contactable by phone and not have to rely on public transport to get to, news events quickly. So it all kind of free falls from there, really.
I mean, you say it's right place, right time, and it is to a degree, but
that's right, because I was a woman, that they didn't have any women working there, and I think that helped. I think they were, do you know what I mean? They didn't have a female photographer, and I showed up, and they were like, great.
I totally know what you mean.
So I think that was a lucky break in that sense,
But I guess what I'm saying is that you say it's right place, right time, but someone else could have just been there that day, took some lovely images and gone home, whereas you didn't. You took the initiative to think, hang on, there's no one here from the Telegraph, there's a gap which I can potentially fill, and you had the courage to do it and pursue it. Has there been any other examples throughout your career where that willingness to put yourself forward and drive to create has served you well?
Yeah, constantly. It's kind of difficult to think of other specific examples now, because I feel like that's what you've got to constantly do. You've got to constantly push yourself. Like in lockdown now, none of us have. I mean, well, I don't know who's getting loads of jobs, but certainly not many of the photographers I've spoken to have been rushed off their feet in lockdown. So we've got to sort of think, right, what can we do in this time to sort of be creative and make stuff? And you're constantly kind of. But I think that those lucky breaks happen when you're doing everything in your power to make them happen, that's when those lucky breaks come. Do you know what I mean? There's like a brilliant quote. If you Google "until one is committed," the quote will come up in Google, and it basically talks about until you commit yourself to your decision, then it's going to be tricky. As soon as you commit to the goal or the decision and you go for it, then all sorts of things occur that you would never have dreamed of to help you in your mission. And I really feel that's true in my whole career. So whenever someone says to me, you know, what's happening? And I go, oh my God, I've got nothing in the diary. And then I start thinking, right, what can I do? What can I create? And then the next day I'll get an email or I'll get a phone call. You know, it's kind of, I think it works like that. But the point being that I've forgotten your original question, but I think the answer to your question is about being determined.
It's interesting then that you said about putting yourself in the shoes and making those decisions. I spoke to Chris Weston, who's a wildlife photographer, and he said when he made the decision to quit his job and become a wildlife photographer, he had no work, but he thought like a wildlife photographer, and he got business cards made, and in his mind he just decided, I am a wildlife photographer. And that drive, it's what you're talking about, is what spurred him on. Let's talk about your time at the Telegraph, if we may, because you covered some landmark events in your time, notably the war in Iraq and the Asian tsunami. For anyone listening that is thinking about a career in photojournalism, what does a typical day look like? Now, I know obviously the environment and the circumstances that you find yourself in will vary, but ultimately the fundamentals, I imagine, which underpin your role as a photojournalist are fairly consistent.
Do you mean in terms of like, you know, sort of what time you get up and how you operate? And, you know, because in any job like that, you're up before dawn, you're out and about shooting, you know, if you're in a war, you might be in an embed with soldiers one day, or there might be some, you know, a bomb's gone off and you're going to see what's happened after it's gone off. So you're kind of following your nose each day, but you're always up and out early. And especially if you're working on deadline for an agency or a newspaper, you know, you have to think about getting the images back to your client in good time for them to be able to do something with them.
You mentioned then so casually, you know, about bombs going off and things. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where circumstances outside of your control could have affected both your safety and also your work? And if so, what steps did you take during that time to ensure that A, you remained safe, but also that the quality of your work was delivered to the best it could be?
I haven't really been in sort of combat. You know, I've been on embeds with the army where we've been out on patrol and there's gunfire and shooting and people are running off down the street. And what I actually learned in those kind of scenarios was that's actually not what I'm interested in, because I sort of remember sort of trying to catch up with all the soldiers with all my flak jacket on and cameras, and couldn't quite keep up with them and was stressing out. And then when I eventually caught up with them, I got a photograph of them holding a man with a bag over his head, and I just thought, that what have I, you know, I could have been shot, and it's not even a picture that means anything to me. I think those scenarios are about finding out what bits of those jobs it is that interest you, and that's how you stay safe. You follow your instincts. You work with trusted local translators and drivers who've been recommended by other people who've worked with them, and they can come. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. That's really key. You've got to have a really good local network, whether it's through the NGO you're working with, so you sort of have contacts on the ground who know local communities and people, or whether it's your fixer. And that's kind of what you rely on in those conflict type scenarios and in natural disasters.
How much are you working to a brief in those situations, and how much is you following your instincts for a story or an image?
I mean, my briefs these days are capture the story. Do you know what I mean? It's like, cover the event, cover the story in your own way. And I think that's what photographers are kind of booked for these days. It's kind of, how do you translate what's going on in front of you, and how are you going to sort of create that as a story to then relay to people? So a lot of it is down to me, but somebody I know that, for example, if I'm working for an NGO, they're going to want nice, strong portraits of everyone we interview. You know, there's kind of obvious, well, maybe not obvious, you know, I'm saying that after 20 years, but, you know what you sort of, if your client might say, I want a nice portrait of everyone that the writer interviews, and then I want a portrait of the town, for example, was a commission I got from the Wall Street Journal recently. And that just means like wandering around a town and taking nice images, like street pictures and scenes you come across, and being creative. And I think, so yeah, in terms of a brief, that's about it really, which is great, isn't it?
It is great. Is that how you like to work and prefer to work as well? Will you have your own license to tell the story?
Yeah. Love that. I mean, I love it when a client says we want XYZ, you know, because that's also good too, because then you can go, here's XYZ. And by the way, when I was there, I felt really inspired, and I've done ABC as well. That's how I like to work. And then when you find that they go, oh, I love ABC, but you've already given them XYZ, but they don't really know what they want. So when you show them something that you think proud of, then that's normally what they end up going with. So that's the way I like to work.
It's so interesting, and it is one of the consistent themes, and it was Ian Gavin said that you should always under-promise and over-deliver, and it's exactly what you've just said. They've asked for X, Y, and Z, and you give A, B, and C as well.
Yeah.
It's so important, and it's been one of the constant themes throughout speaking to great photographers.
I mean, you can't always deliver X, Y, Z and A, B, and C, but maybe you can deliver X, Y, Z and A. You know, I think there isn't always time, you know, on some jobs, but there's always a little bit of time to do something a little extra, you know. So I think it's a balance, isn't it? But yeah, I do love it when there's a kind of a story that I can really tell in my own way.
What for you makes a good portrait image?
Where you can feel that there's some kind of connection between the photographer and the subject, because that's what a portrait is really. It's about that connection. And when you can feel that the person is really themselves in front of the camera, you know, like there's a girl I've been photographing for 10 years called Shannon, and she's just amazing because she doesn't change when I hold the camera up. So I think that's really something to look out for. It was portraits you were talking about, right? Yeah,
it was, and I'm pleased that you mentioned Shannon, because we're going to come on to speak about her in more detail a bit later on. But you also mentioned something then which is interesting, where potentially a subject is offering you something rather than just being themselves. If you feel that is happening, what techniques have you developed over the years to put someone at ease in front of the camera?
To put the camera down and just have a chat to them about, you know, their love life, or, you know, what they like to do, or to divert the subject slightly, you know, to take it away from holding the camera in their face. Because I think it's very natural as soon as someone holds a camera in your face to sort of freeze up. And I think I've observed it with like actors and actresses, for example, when they're photographed as themselves, it's a lot harder for them than when they're playing a role in a movie, I think. You know, because there's something quite vulnerable about being in front of a camera. And if someone's prepared to give something of themselves to that process, then that's when you can really make the magic.
Yes, I do. I know exactly what you mean.
Because I would do it differently to how you would do it. And it's got to be genuine. It's got to be authentic. You've got to meet that person with your authentic self in order for them to come back at you with that. I think that's how you make people feel comfortable.
Yes, I completely agree, and actually I work in a very similar way to you in that respect. What techniques did you develop during your time at the Telegraph that enabled you to capture the story in a single image or a series of images?
I think it's just that practice, and that, you know, working for a newspaper, you're working to extremely tight deadlines, and you might some days be doing 3 or 4 jobs a day. So you've really got to sort of hone in to what it is you're to the moment, and that's a really Yeah, sorry, can you just ask that question again? Because I've lost my train of thought. I was going to say something else as well.
That's okay. No, I was saying, what techniques did you develop during your time with the Telegraph that enabled you to capture a story quickly and in a single image or a series of images, potentially?
Yeah, I think what it is just, you know, for those first 8-9 years of my working life, I was taking, you know, doing between 1 and kind of 4 jobs a day every day, basically 6 days a week. And it's that 10,000 hour rule, isn't it? The more you do something, sharp get at it. And especially when you're jostling with like a whole bunch of men who are elbowing you in the tits to get out the way, you really got to be on your game, you know? So yeah, that kind of like, you know, how to stand your ground, how to get in there, how to know when a situation is changing and when a moment is building, you know, and how to read a map, how to find my way around London, and what to do when the editor phones up and sort of shouts a name and a village down at the phone at you, and you know that they're going to expect pictures in an hour and you don't even know where it is, and just not to panic, basically. That, I think that's the biggest thing working for the Telegraph taught me is, you know, just stay chilled. You know, you're never lost. Just stay chilled, and it's kind of, it's amazing what you can learn quickly, I think.
Yeah, because I think, and it's a great rule for life actually, if you're panicking and you're flustered and you're rushing, you tend to miss things, whereas if you relax, you can take in the big picture and you can see and evaluate what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So it's a great lesson just for life rather than photography in many respects. Having spent 8 years at the Telegraph, what prompted you to make the decision to go freelance? Because that's a big life choice, particularly if you've got a mortgage, you've got, you know, responsibilities.
Having a sort of contract with a newspaper is a good gig, isn't it? You know, it's
yeah, exactly.
I think it was, you know, the fact that I was photographing Chelsea Flower Show for the 7th year running, and I was photographing, you know, penguins eating ice creams at the zoo on a hot day for the 7th year in a row, and the fact that Sotheby's were selling another Stradivari violin. And I've also, I mean, I got some amazing jobs, but I also found that I got a lot of kind of like weather and children and animals, and kind of, oh, we need someone to go and create a picture out of not very much here, alongside the kind of incredible charity trips and kind of conflict stuff that I covered. And I just felt like I wasn't learning as quickly as I was in the beginning, and I felt like my enthusiasm was you know, not as high, and that I wanted to spend, like, what happened was when I covered the tsunami, that job, I was there for like 3 or 4 weeks, and I really went in deep to the story, and I sort of made a whole set of images, and I felt like that's what I wanted to do in the future. I didn't want to sort of dip in and to the sort of surface of stories. I wanted to spend time, and that was the kind of ultimate thing that made me think I'm going to have to go freelance, because it's the only way I'm going to get to really have a bit of time. And you know, at that point, time would have meant a day on a shoot rather than kind of half an hour. So yeah, I think it's just, you know, when it's time to, when you're getting slightly stagnant and you need new challenges, and so it was the right time. I left before I sort of stopped enjoying it, you know.
Yes, I do. Having made that decision, what practical steps did you take to ensure that the transition into freelancing was as smooth as it could be?
I didn't take any steps at all.
Excellent.
What steps do you mean?
Well, I just mean, I guess, in terms of...
Oh, I tell you what happened. Sort of slightly commercial, advertorial type job that I then took holiday, and I earned like sort of a couple of grand, and I was like, great, that's a couple of grand. I can start my freelance career. So it just meant I could pay my rent for the first 2 months. That was it. That was my prep.
But it's simple things like that, because again, I think it will resonate with a lot of people that want to go out on their own and freelance, but feel that they're held back potentially by a salary or things like that. So even though it sounds really obvious, but actually that buffer of paying your rent for 2 months is a large factor, and it helps you and gives you the confidence to go off and do it.
And everyone's going to have their individual, for me at that point, I just wanted to be able to pay the rent for 2 months. For other people, they might need to know they have to cover their bills for 6 months. And I think, that was 10 years ago. And I think we're in a very different climate now. So I think, or have a job that you do 1 day a week or whatever, so that you know that your basics are covered. And but I think a little bit of panic is good, isn't it? Because it drives you on to sort of, contact those people and put your portfolio together and get on the bloody phone to your website people and find out why it's not working or whatever,
Now, you've mentioned the website, and this is something else that I've been speaking with photographers about. You have a large body of work behind you which spans 20 years, if I'm not mistaken. How do you whittle that amount of work down to, say, 50 images to show on your website?
I think it's quite easy. I mean, I probably only take sort of 2 pictures a year that I really, really love. I think your standards just get higher and higher. You're looking for those absolute, because once you've taken a couple of diamond images, then you want all your pictures to be that good. And I think, especially, I mean, for me, there isn't really anything apart from the tsunami and a couple of other shots in the archive section that's kind of previous to the first 10 years, because that all seems kind of more like it doesn't seem relevant now, So I think you have to be ruthless with yourself and stick your pictures all over the wall and see which ones you get bored of quickly. That's a really good way to do it, because the ones where you're like, oh, that's annoying me now, then that's not one to have in your portfolio. So, that's the answer.
Which of your images do you have framed?
Only one, where I was sat a minute ago, which is a picture of Shannon. And the only reason I've got it framed is because it was exhibited for the National Open Art Competition. But I don't know why I don't have my pictures around my house. I have other people's photographs. And also maybe it's just that thing of, I don't know. Good question. One image, that's enough. I need space for everyone else's beautiful work. Put my work on their walls.
Well, look, I think we've come on quite nicely, and we've mentioned Shannon a few times. And this is one of the, again, constant themes when speaking to great photographers. There is a focus on personal projects. And I read a quote from you that said, think about what you want to say, think about what you care about, and then photograph that. So with that in mind, I'd like to explore your personal project, The Big O. For anyone that's unfamiliar with the project, would you mind explaining what it is?
The Big O is a intimate portrait of the kids behind the obesity statistics here in the UK. So 1 in 3 kids under 18s basically is classified as obese or overweight in the UK, and that's kind of similar across the world these days. So when I quit the Telegraph, I thought, what's important to me? What can I make work about that means something to me? And I was a sort of obese teenager, and I think it's never been a subject that's been tackled very well, I didn't think. So I thought I'm going to have to go for it. So that's where my project came from, is sort of turning the camera on the one thing that had kind of blighted my life, as it were. And that's what I was referring to when I said that about make work that you care about. And it doesn't have to be for other people out there making work that you care about. It doesn't have to be a big issue like that. It could be, you love jive dancing, so go and make work about that. It's kind of make work that means something to you, especially with long-term projects. I mean, this project's now gone on for 10 years. And so I started off photographing a couple of sort of 13, 14-year-old girls, both of whom I still know now. Shannon is one of them. And along the way have met other young people whose lives I've followed using kind of sort of by shooting like observed moments and following them in their life, but also sort of creating stage portraits or asking them to pose in their homes. And it's taken a long time, because you've got to get everybody on board and the kids and the families to trust you. And because even an issue like that, I mean, you don't think it's that sensitive. I mean, I've covered sort of all the kind of sensitive subjects you could ever think of. And yet approaching someone in the UK and saying, can I photograph your fat child for my project on obesity is quite a sensitive one to broach. So anyway, so that's what the Big O is. It's a piece of work that aims to sort of help people understand the complex nuances of obesity and what it means to be obese. And, you know, because I sort of think if we don't really understand the problems, we don't really know how to, we're never going to know how to come up with the solutions or how to tackle them.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it then, it is a really sensitive issue, particularly amongst younger people as well. And you're right, you have to build that trust with someone. How did you meet Shannon in the first place?
Well, that was another lucky break where I was chatting to a writer friend of mine, and she just said to me, oh, what are you thinking? What are you working on? And I was like, well, actually, I'm thinking about starting some personal work on childhood obesity. And she was like, oh, I'm going to this launch of a health website next week. Come along. There's a section on obesity in young people. So I went along, and Shannon was there with someone that she went to an after school club with, and she stood up and read a poem, and it made me cry. So I went up to her afterwards and said, can I come up? And I just said, my name's Abbie. I'm a photographer. I'm making a project about being overweight. Would you be interested in talking to me more? I'll come up to Sheffield and have a cup of tea with you and your mum, and we can, you know, I can tell you some more. And she was like, yeah, okay then. So that's what we did. And it all started from there. And then I sort of was focused, and then I met another amazing kid called Chelsea. And then from then I met a few other people, and then I thought, oh, I'll just do girls. And then I thought, why aren't I doing boys as well? And then I started trying to find boys. And anyway, it's all coming together. That's what I've been doing in lockdown, basically editing this 10-year project, because it cannot go on any longer than 10 years. I mean, it will go on longer because I won't ever stop photographing Shannon and Chelsea and some of the others. But it's that kind of, I've got to sort of birth it, because there's bits of it out there online and on my website, but, you know, I've been holding it back for the kind of big reveal. But what's interesting, when I started the project, there was no kind of body positivity. So it was a lot more sort of surrounded in kind of shame and guilt than I think maybe it is still now. You know, but the body positive movement's been interesting, but it's, again, I'm all for kind of accepting your body and embracing who you are, but I don't believe it's healthy to be overweight. So I think it's that looking at kind of obesity through where you get a sense of the human beings and what's involved in living with obesity, but whilst also understanding that, yeah, it's not healthy to live as a 24 stone woman, you know.
Yeah, so it's finding the balance.
Exactly.
Essentially.
Let's not shame people living with obesity, but let's not celebrate massive bodies for the sake of it either. Let's find a balance where we can start to love ourselves, and because that's what I've learned through this journey. Actually, it's kind of, I've accepted who I am a lot more, and I think that's what happens when you make work you care about. You resolve issues within yourself, and I think, you know, people ask me and other photographers or artists or musicians, you know, why do you do what you do? And it's kind of, there's a selfish thing to it, isn't it? It's like a journey of self-discovery.
Yeah, and I don't think it's selfish at all. In fact, Chris Weston and I, who I mentioned earlier, the wildlife photographer, talked in depth about mindfulness in photography, and it's something I'd subconsciously been aware of, but I'd never really given it much thought, if that makes sense. Has it helped you personally doing this project?
Yeah, definitely. I don't feel kind of ashamed of saying I was a fat teenager, and I'm, you know, I have to constantly kind of be mindful of making the right choices when it comes to eating and exercise and all that kind of thing, you know. So, but I'm not beating myself up anymore, and I think that's come about through doing the work. Well, up to it and look and researching as well, you know. And that's the other thing about obesity, is there's kind of loads of research now that a lot of it's genetic, and once you become overweight, then the fat cells never really go away. They shrink, but they sort of pop back up straight, and it's to do with once you become overweight, the hormones in your stomach changes, and that changes how you crave food and how you react to it. So there's all this kind of sort of scientific research being done that's really interesting as well. And it's kind of, yeah, anyway, I'm rambling.
No, you're not at all. You're not at all. Do you think you would be in the place that you're in today, being very comfortable talking about it, had you not explored it through photography?
Definitely not. I definitely don't think I would, because what I've also done is found all these old diaries from when I'm like 14 and 15, when I'm going to like Weight Watchers and Slimming Club, and it's just really helped me kind of, I don't know, heal a little bit from that, I guess. And putting it out to the world, it's like literally a weight off my shoulders. Not a weight off, it's not that bad, but it's like a little weight off my shoulders, and it feels good. I feel like, I'm a great person to tell this story, because I know what it means, because it's my story as much as it's Shannon's story, as much as it's Chelsea's story, or Byron, or any of the other kids that you meet on this, through this work. And I think it's really touched other people that have seen it. I get amazing response to it. So, and I think that's all we're trying to do, isn't it? Sort of, well, all I'm trying to do with my work is sort of, it's about intimacy and human connection and how we all relate to each other. And I mean, that's what I think is important in life. So that's what I like to try and address, or try and get to in my work.
It's the best compliment that you can receive as well about your work. If you help people in the way that you do, and for people to recognise your journey and to help people through photography, it must be the best feeling for you and your work.
Yeah, or even if someone just sees an image and they like it, or, I don't know, like I think in lockdown we've all probably been, like everyone's been taking up creative pursuits, haven't they? It's wonderful, everyone I speak taken up drawing or gardening or cooking or writing or, whatever. So I think there's definitely something therapeutic to it. And I think maybe, the fact that the world slowed down in the last 3 months, maybe we're all kind of tapping into that a little bit more, Have you noticed with Shannon and Chelsea and the other children that you've photographed, have you noticed them grow in confidence because of the work you've done with them? I mean, I don't know that I could sort of say, yeah, they've grown in confidence because of our project, but I definitely think, like I've just you with Shannon for the website, for example, where me and her are chatting, and she's like, yeah, I wanted to get involved with the project because I liked you, basically, and I thought you were nice, and I thought what you were saying was kind of really important, and she's definitely got a lot out of it, and I don't know what the other kids have got out of it, but as a child or a young teenager, going through the process of being photographed by someone and going into that kind of thoughts about those difficult areas of your life is quite a big thing, I think. So I think only positive stuff can come from that, and I've certainly held those relationships with those kids throughout, and made sure that if any of them feel uncomfortable and decide they don't want their pictures being used, then that's cool,
Yeah.
Yeah. Although I'd be devastated if any of them pulled out, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
But,
of course.
They're invested. I think they're invested. Like the Wellcome Trust published something about my work on boys, and I phoned up one of the boys, Vinay, and I said, Vinay, they want to use the picture of you with your moobs out. So I did this picture of Vinay in the bathroom, and he's brushing his teeth, and he's kind of got moobs. And that's kind of something for boys gaining weight, that they feel extremely self-conscious of. And I sort of said, how do you feel about them putting that on their website? And he was like, yeah, put it up there. I don't care. 2 years ago, I wouldn't have wanted you to publish it. But no, I want people to sort of, see that all kinds of bodies, are okay. And it's about feeling good about yourself. And that's when good things happen, whether it's through, losing weight or whatever it is.
It must be. I'm fascinated. I think it must bring these youngsters so much confidence to have someone like you not only show an interest in them, but to understand what they're going through. And I think it must really help that you have had those experiences as well.
Well, that's what Shannon said. She said, you know, and I can't do a Sheffield accent to my shame after 10 years. I love mimicking my friends' accents, but, you know, she was like, to be honest, if you'd been like a skinny mini, then I probably wouldn't have wanted to do the project. As in, if I'd rocked up a size 0 in my skinny,
of course,
she wouldn't have said yes, you know. Anyway.
I'm pleased you mentioned earlier as well that this project has gone for 10 years, because it was one of the things that I wanted to ask you. How do you know when a project like that is not finished? Because you said you will always work on it in some way, shape or form, but how do you know when it's ready?
You just know, I just knew it was ready like a year ago, and it's taken me a year to sort of get round to getting the book deal ready and the website edited and all the rest of it. So you do genuinely know. But the only reason it's taken me 10 years is because I've been slow, and it could have taken me 5. I think there's a balance between being scared to put the work out there and also give yourself a deadline of getting on and doing it, and also between, but for me, like for this work, for example, there was no rush, and actually taking the time benefited the project, because it's really meant that my relationship with all the kids is strong, and I know that we're all on the same page, you know, we know that. Whereas if I'd done it in 2 years, that might not have been the same. But I think there's a balance between taking time, but also getting off your arse and bloody finishing that project and not procrastinating as well. And only we inside ourselves know what the difference is, you know, and that takes being honest with yourself. It's like, am I being a lazy arse, or does this project need more? I mean, we always need more, but even I, who constantly, nothing's ever enough, I know that there's enough now to do something with it.
I think it's something that a lot of artists maybe not struggle with, but certainly will resonate with, because like you said then, it's important to give yourself a deadline, but sometimes when you're creating something, it just takes time, and you have to give it that time to breathe.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you need that time to understand what it is you're trying to say.
Yes.
And who to say it to, as much as take the pictures, you know, because in the last 10 years, I haven't been, you know, some years have gone past and I've only done one shoot, you know, because work's gone crazy or whatever, or because it hasn't stopped raining for 3 months or whatever the reason. But so, yeah.
Did you know from the off that the project was working? And by that, I mean, when I spoke with Alice Tomlinson about Ex Voto, she said she'd worked on it for 4 years or 5 years, I think it was. And she said it just wasn't, she said, I knew there was something there, but it wasn't quite, I hadn't found it. And then she switched to medium format, and all of a sudden, she said it was like a light bulb. Did the Big O, did you feel you were onto something from the start?
Yeah, not with the images necessarily, but with the idea and the fact that it was going to be that I was going to do that idea, that I was going to work on that subject. As soon as I thought, why am I about working on the subject of obesity, I knew I was on something. But it then took a couple of years before I got a couple of images that I thought, yes, okay, this is going to work. We need more of these. You know what I mean? I think that's true for everyone. It's like you can definitely feel that an idea is good, but until you actually go and start your idea, then you don't know if it's going to work or not. But you know if the idea is good.
Yes, of course. What does the journey look like now when you're getting ready to launch? And you mentioned you've been working on a book as well.
Yeah, it's this. I think this is the hardest bit, and I've listened to lots of other photography podcasts where people have said, you know, it's funny because people go, oh, starting's the hardest bit, and then people go like, oh, doing the main body of the work's the hardest bit, and now I'm like, finishing's the hardest bit. You know, so yeah, it's all hard, isn't it? Is that the question?
I think so. Is it what is it? What is hard about it? Is it selecting the images you want to use, or is it the process in general?
No, the bit I find torturous is the writing, the artist statement, the kind of writing what the project's about, the introduction bits. Like on the website, there's lots of different sections that I've got to write. You know, for the website, I'm doing like a big section on Shannon, a section on a kid called Byron, you know, and then it's all that writing that I find. The editing I love editing the images, even when I'm bored of them. But when you know that you're coming down to the final now, you're choosing them for a book. That's the bit I like. It's all the other stuff.
You mentioned something then which I wanted to touch on with you, which is the editing. What does your journey look like from the moment you take the card out of the camera to delivering what will be your final image? On a
typical job these days, so I would download my cards at the end of the day. I would have a quick look through the images and do like a 1 star on anything that I remotely liked. And then if I didn't have to file the images, like normally these days a client wouldn't expect the images until I get back from a trip or until a few days after the shoot. So I'd have like a couple of days to edit, which I love. So day one at the end of the shoot, download the images, go through them all and just mark up anything I remotely like. And this is in
Lightroom, presumably.
I actually use Bridge.
I see. I beg your pardon.
And that's what I mean by putting a star on whatever you do in Lightroom. And then I wouldn't look at them then if I could until if the deadline. So say the job's on Monday, do that Monday night. If they don't want the pictures till Friday, I wouldn't look at them till Wednesday again. I'd give myself as much time as possible to then go through. I'd then do a second edit, and then I'd bring those pictures up in Photoshop, and then as I went through them in Photoshop, any ones that I couldn't be bothered to touch up would mean that I don't really like them and they would get discarded then. So that's my kind of process. And then that would get delivered, and then they would be captioned and delivered to the client. But then of those images, I might only like a handful myself for portfolio, website, or whatever.
What do those days of reflection offer you, where you step away from the first import?
They allow you to see what you have got rather than what you missed. So,
sorry, say that again. They allow you to
see what you did capture rather than what you missed. So
I see.
I'm like, oh, why didn't I shoot that? Oh God, why didn't I get that? You know, why didn't I think about doing that or this or whatever? So if you have, like, for me, sort of 24 hours not looking at them means I can just think, right, what did I get? Rather than like, oh, why didn't I get that?
Yes, I see what you mean.
That might be a thing rather than a photographer thing. I don't know.
Will you ever revisit an image that you've perhaps shot a long time ago? So I'm thinking of the big O here. Is there an image that you will revisit in terms of editing it now because your style and your technique may have changed? So I guess what I'm saying is, have you edited an image maybe 8 years ago for the big O that you thought was the image and the final image, which you've now looked at and reflected on and gone, I'd have edited that different and gone back and done it?
What do you mean edited it? Do you mean in Photoshop? I don't really do a lot in Photoshop. I would only do what you would do in a darkroom. So I don't have a style in terms of, you know, everything has to be muted or juiced up or whatever. So when I open my pictures up in Photoshop, I just, you know, do the contrast. I might dodge and burn. I might sharpen slightly the focal point of the image and maybe a tiny bit of saturation, and that's it. So I'm not really doing a lot to them in that sense. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, no, totally.
Yeah. So if I've got a picture of Shannon that I shot 8 years ago, if I've got a high res version of it, then probably not going to do. It might just be about balance, taking a slight colour balance when I've got, say, all the book images together, just to make sure they're sort of roughly match.
Yes.
But I'm not a big person on kind of beyond what's necessary in terms of Photoshop.
So you'd rather keep it simple than, and I mean that in a nice way. I mean, you'd rather just rather than imposing a style on it, you'd like to let the image speak for itself.
Exactly. Like the style is in the shooting of the image. rather than in the post-production, is what I mean.
Yes, that is a much more succinct way of putting it. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. Yes.
We got that.
What is your journey?
Yeah, I'm not fancy pants post-production. I don't think it's necessary.
Yes, that's thank you. I'm glad we got there in the end. That's exactly what I was trying to get at. As a self-taught photographer, what's the best mistake or mistakes that you've made throughout your career? And I don't mean that in a negative way, because I'm a huge fan of mistakes. I'm self-taught as well, and it's how we learn. What's some of the best mistakes you've made that have improved you as a photographer down the line?
I think it just taking me a long time to kind of find my voice in photography. So, and to find pictures that I feel like are my voice. That's been my, or trying to take pictures for other people. Those have been, but they were mistakes I repeated for a long time before I learnt them. So that's a really good question, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. The more mistakes you make, the better. But I'm gonna come back to you on that. I'm sorry, I can't think of anything for right now, but it's a great question.
That's okay. That's totally fine. You also mentioned something earlier which I thought was interesting, and I think it's super important if you want to, as you said then, find your voice and work on something that you are passionate about. What will you say no to now at this point in your career that allow you to focus on what you want to do rather than what someone wants you to do for them?
I think the only thing I'd say no to is if somebody wanted... I don't know what I'd say no to, because there's lots of different reasons for saying yes to jobs. So for me, it's kind of, is it a fun new experience or fun, interesting experience that I would love to do, whatever? B, is it well paid? Or C, is it adding to my body of work? And I think if any one of those are kind of ticked, which most jobs are, so unless I was busy, I wouldn't like to work with people who are rude, or who, if I've worked with people and they're rude, but that doesn't happen very often. Or if someone was, I don't know, I don't know that I've said no unless I'm genuinely busy. The only time I tend to say no is if I'm already booked up.
Which
and
is...
no, I can't do it.
Never a bad time to say no if you're booked up.
Unless it's just a job that's not, not well paid enough for what they're expecting. I think if a client is, if a client doesn't have a budget for what they want, then they can go and do it elsewhere. I think there's a line that we all have to draw ourselves of what we think is our work is worth.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
And that's not, I'm not getting out of bed for less than 10,000. That's a kind of, if you want to pay me 50 quid to cover your conference for the entire day and then deliver 500 edited pictures, you can go and find someone else to do it, kind of thing.
Yes, no, I couldn't agree more. And you're right, it's not about saying I won't get out of bed for this fee. I think it's just showing respect for the work that we do.
Exactly,
and it's important. What is the most important item in your kit bag? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a technical item.
Because they're not in my kit bag.
You're what? Sorry, say that again.
I can't say my eyes because they're not in my kit bag.
Well, no, they can't. That's why I said it doesn't necessarily have to be technical. Ian Gavin, for example, said his attitude.
Yes, exactly. I think for me, it's kind of your eyes are the most important thing, and your heart. It's kind of, are you connected to whatever it is or are you open to whatever it is you're photographing? Are you open to feeling it or to, in that sense? So yeah, your attitude is exactly right. It's kind of, are you approaching it with curiosity and with openness, and are you allowing the best experience to unfold? And then apart from that, I just got a Fuji medium format camera last year, so that's fast becoming that's sort of taking over from my Canon 5Ds.
We haven't really touched on your work on film. How did you mentioned a few times about working in a dark room. Where did you learn that skill in the first place as a self-taught photographer?
Mum and Dad taught me, actually, because they'd been to art college and they had an old dark room in the shed at home. So they taught me how to develop films when I was like 13, 14. But I was rubbish at it. Like, I remember getting to the student newspaper and there was a guy there and he printed one of my pictures and it looked amazing. And I was like, wow, there's a real skill, you know, because there is, of course, there's a real skill to printing. And clearly he had it much better than I did, because I was like, wow. And that was exciting, you know, to see how someone else kind of translates your image. So I don't develop my own stuff now, though. And I've only used film for my sort of long-term personal work just because it's so expensive, and even though it's just gorgeous. But this Fuji digital is pretty good. I've been using that in lockdown to kind of do a bit of a few bits and pieces in the hood.
What's the ultimate goal? And or it could be... I've asked this a few times and I'm not sure what the correct question is. It's either what's the ultimate goal or how would you like your work to be remembered? And they're one in the same and they're different. Like,
for me, the ultimate goal is to kind of get my body of work on obesity to a state where I feel proud of it. So, for example, where, you know, I've done the book and the website's out there and I'm now working on the next stage of the project that I've kind of been dreaming up in the last year, you know, and I can't really think beyond that goal. That is it's kind of, that was my goal 10 years ago, to produce a body of work that I really felt proud of and I felt that was really from the heart, you know, and that meant something to me. So that's still my goal. Until I've done that, I don't know what the next goal is going to be. Although I have started panicking, oh God, what's the next goal? What's the next idea? And it's like, just chill out, just, you know, finish this one.
I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because did you start the Big O with a goal in mind, or was it a more organic process?
Well, the goal was was very simple. The goal was to create a body of work that I felt really proud of. That was it. That was the goal. I didn't have a book in mind. I didn't have an exhibition in mind. It was just about, I want to do something with my camera that I'm proud of. That's it. And we're getting there. We're getting there.
Good. I think that is a lovely answer. So I'm going to try a few quick fire questions with you. And I'm not looking for anything deep with these necessarily. It's just whatever springs to mind, whatever your instinct is. So,
okay, I feel that's a university challenge for photography.
A little bit, yes. So black and white or colour?
Colour. I love colour.
You didn't even blink then. Why colour?
Just for me, I see the world in colour, and I don't know. Although saying that, I bought an old throwaway black and white, you know, snappy snap camera the other day, and I've been taking some pictures on that, and I really like them. But I mean, colour for me, I don't know. I dream in colour. I see in colour. Like, colours are gorgeous, and just adds another. You need all the light and the composition anyway. So bringing colour into it, I don't know. Yeah, just no doubt.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this one, but I'll ask it anyway. Personal project or commercial project?
But you see, I love them both. Yes, personal projects are key, but commercial projects are really important too, because they teach you different skills. You know, it's kind of working with like getting to work with a creative team of people is great, for example, and they pay the bills, so that's great. And I think, you know, the goal for me is to have something really strong personally on the go and some really strong commercial work on the go.
To what extent will you ever find a crossover between your commercial work and your personal work? For example, will you ever be on a commercial shoot but find something within that project that you think could work as a personal project as well?
Definitely. I think there's ideas everywhere, you know, and that's why I you know, it would have to be a pretty shit job for me to say no to it, because I think you never know what you're going to get when you get out and meet people and do things and see things. So yeah.
Okay. Prime or Zoom?
Prime.
Again, didn't blink. You're good at this. Why? Why Prime? When I left the Telegraph, I sold my Zooms and bought Primes, and I just really love the quality. And if you know, when you work in press photography, you need a zoom lens because your feet can't take you everywhere, but you know, your feet are the zoom lens. And then just there's nothing, a 50mm prime lens, beautiful. Yes, I couldn't agree more. It's a lovely, lovely lens. Canon Nikon or other? Because I know you mentioned Fuji earlier.
Yeah. Now this one is kind of, I mean, I started on Nikon, but then Canon was so far ahead of the game when with digital at the beginning. So I've always used Canon. I really love my Fuji. I really love my Mamiya. My favourite camera in the world ever is a Ricoh GR1V, little snappy snap throwaway camera. Not throwaway, but, well, actually that is what happened to the 6 that I owned. They got through across dance floors and died drunken deaths. So yeah, for me, the cameras are tools, and different cameras are great tools for different jobs. You wouldn't use a screwdriver to hammer a nail in and all those kind of cliches. So I think there's a lot of lovely bits of kit out there, and it's about what feels good in your hand, and yeah, so some questions I'm like, yes, prime, and then others I'm like, oh, I don't know, I'm not.
That's good. All right, let's try and see where this one goes. Film or digital?
See, my son would be like, no, mummy, you have to choose. My son would be like, you have to choose between dying by fire or by drowning, mummy. So on this, I think it's really hard. But if my son was saying, no, mummy, you have to choose, I guess it would be film.
I like your son's outlook. I like it. You have to choose, mummy. You have to. He'll go far in life. I like him. Yeah. Studio or natural light?
Natural light.
May I ask why?
This natural light's gorgeous, and then whenever I do studio work, my favourite light is a big breezy, massive sun in the studio. So that's kind of like a natural light. But yeah, natural light every time, if possible. People or landscapes? Oh, people. If I do, yeah, people, 100% people. But I love landscapes, but I love people more.
It's funny, everyone has said the same thing, and I completely agree with you. I love landscapes, but you're right, there's just something, as human beings, I don't think there's anything more interesting.
Exactly, endlessly fascinating.
Home or abroad?
Oh, I need both. I'm really greedy, and sometimes I just need it all, and I need home and abroad. And I'm missing travelling, or, even within the UK, travelling for work at the moment. So I don't know, it's interesting though, isn't it? You learn a lot about yourself being in your home environment and looking close to home.
Yeah, and I think that's weirdly been one of the things about lockdown, is that it has forced us to open our eyes to what is right under our noses.
Yeah.
Artistically, I mean.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
maybe spiritually as well, but certainly artistically. Okay, final question. If you could jump in a time machine and go and speak to that... How old were you when you picked up your first camera?
About 13 or 14.
About 13 or 14. If you could jump in a time machine and go and speak to that 13/14-year-old girl and give her... and spend the day with her and give her some advice, what would you tell her? And how would you spend the day?
Hopefully, laughing as much as possible and going on an adventure, whether that was wherever that would be. That could just be in the local field. So lots of laughing, adventures, and I would just ram it home, really be true to yourself, trust your instincts, and don't let your doubt get in the way all the fucking time. And it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay. Just keep at it.
It's honestly, it's so refreshing to hear you say, don't let doubt get in the way, because people can look at your career and think that you have it all figured out. And it's so refreshing to hear you say that you still have doubt, because we all do. We of course we all do, but it's so refreshing to hear.
I'm hoping at some point the doubt dies down a bit. I mean, I don't know if anyone's got any out there's got any advice on that. Maybe it's kind of, as each decade, as you sort of make each milestone decade, you get a sort of slightly more chilled out version of the last. I don't know, or just different things. I don't know, but I think, but doubt's also kind of creatively interesting, isn't it? Because in times of hardship, you're kind of forced to find, your way through it, and that involves being creative. So a bit of doubt is good, but I think certainly for me, I've let it hold me back too much over the years.
I guess, and I'm stealing more questions from you here, how have you learnt to deal with that doubt over the years?
Is to feel it and do it anyway. It's like, feel the fear and do it anyway. Yes, you're scared, but and then to listen to those instincts of like, don't let this opportunity pass you by. This is a good one, because there's definitely a few opportunities that I think that I've only one or two in my career that I haven't grabbed, and I really regret it. So it's kind of, even going for it and not getting it is better than not going for it. So that's when, if so that's would be my advice to myself. But it's, I've forgotten where we were going with it.
No, I don't think we were necessarily. It's just, I've always thought doubt is interesting because I feel it. And you said it earlier, any artist that says they don't, I think is not being 100% truthful. And I guess it's because, I've tried to work out why it is, and I guess it's because if you're a mathematician, for example, and A plus B times C gives you an exact outcome, whereas there is no exact outcome with artistic choices.
Exactly. So you can't really get it wrong. And even if you do get it wrong and you don't like what you've done, then you've learned from that. So actually, I mean, that's slightly different, isn't it? Doubt and failure. Because failure is kind of good, because failure you can learn from. Doubt, or slightly more insidious in the sense that I think it can hold you back if you don't kind of learn to get a grip on it. And I think getting a grip on it is, it doesn't mean it goes away, and it doesn't mean, you only get it once a year or once a month. I mean, mine's definitely regular, but it's just that kind of, for me, it's like going for walks or forcing myself to do the thing that I really don't want to do first, or just doing one thing each day. If you're really in a kind of doubtful period, just force yourself to do one thing each day, and then after a week you've done 7 things, and it's like, oh, that's good, and then the doubt ebbs away a bit more. Yeah,
so it's taking small chunks rather than kind of a daunting massive project during a day.
Yeah, I think that's the way to kind of, that's one thing I have learned. Yeah, tackle things in small little chunks, whilst having your eyes on the prize, obviously.
Of course. Well, actually, speaking of eyes on the prize, if you could put one image of yours on a billboard in Times Square or Leicester Square to reflect your work, what would it be?
That's a really good question. I think it would be the image I have of Shannon on my wall, because funnily enough, now I've had it on my wall for a year. It's kind of, so it's her sitting on a sofa just looking out, and it's just a really beautifully lit picture, and she's got an orange vest top on, and there's just something about the sort of, people can go and look it up anyway, can't they? But that's the image I'd have, because I would have said like the fleeing Mosul picture, the one of the girl on the bus, but I think the one of Shannon is just sort of sums up, if I had to choose one. It's hard though, isn't it, just to choose. Says the woman who was saying it's not hard at all to edit earlier.
Well, no, because I think, again, it's one of the things that has really been brought to the surface with all of these conversations, is that we can all look at an image, but behind every image is a story, and there's a reason why that image was taken. And I think that is the key element, particularly for the photographer as well. Yeah. And for me as well, I think series of images are important. Like, it's very rare that an image just works. For example, that incredible shot that Dylan Martinez at Reuters took of the, the bodybuilder picking up the guy in the demo, the Black Lives Matter one. Yes. And I mean, that is just such an incredible, you don't need more than that one image. But for me, I think I really like series of images. So that's why it becomes then difficult to choose one. But I don't know, photography is amazing, isn't it? It is. What will a good series of images look like for you, in order, from a storytelling point of view? It's just getting that flow, isn't it? It could be, do you mean in terms of like number or? No, not necessarily. I guess what sparked my question there was when I spoke to Chris Weston, he said he has a very set technique, and it's almost a film technique in that he will get an establishing shot, he will then get a mid shot, he'll then get a close-up, and then a very close-up shot, and within those 4 images he knows he can tell the story of what he's trying to say.
Oh, I never thought of that. Mine's just really instinctual. Mine's just like I know when I've got enough to tell the story. But yeah, he's got some good tips, isn't he? I better go and listen to his episode. That's a really good way to do it, because then you sort of, you can cover off your basics, and then you're free to see what else is going on around. I mean, for me, I like to sort of use that same distance in my work, I think, rather than not too far away and too close up. I like to keep my sets of images similar distance.
I see. Yes.
There's a set on my Instagram that's shot in South Sudan of portraits of people with their lunch, with their daily meals. So it was really important to me to photograph each of the people with like eyes to camera at eye level with me, and then each of their plates. So I guess it depends what the story is, actually, as to how I approach it and what my essential shots are and what I would knock off first.
Abbie Trayler-Smith, you have been an absolute joy. Thank you very much for your time.
It's been really nice to chat. I'm so excited. I can't wait to kind of binge listen to all the episodes. And thanks for doing this, because I think it's a great resource, because all of us are, it's a kind of lonesome job being a photographer, and it's great to be able to hear how other people are thinking and doing and acting. And so I think it's a great resource for us all to be able to listen to.
That was my conversation with the wonderful Abbie Trayler-Smith. A huge thank you to Abbie for taking the time to come on the show, and as always, I hope you enjoyed listening to her as much as I enjoyed speaking with her. If you did, would you like to enhance your photography further with one short email? Like you, my goal is to improve, so every Friday you can receive a handful of bullet points highlighting things I've discovered from speaking with the best photographers in the world. It could be software recommendations, articles, book quotes, videos we've shared. All are designed to challenge you, expand your photography knowledge, and keep you ahead of the competition. It has become extremely popular since we started this podcast. It's completely free, very short, won't clog up your inbox, but could make a big difference to your photography. If you'd like to receive that, head on over to thestandoutcompany.com/podcast. That is thestandoutcompany.com/podcast. Drop in your email and you'll receive the very next issue. Similarly, this show is all about you. Is there a world-class photographer that you want to hear in conversation? If so, let us know at the same place, thestandoutcompany.com/podcast, and we'll do all we can to get them on the show for you. If there is anything that sparked your interest during my conversation with Abbie, please visit thestandoutcompany.com/podcast, where you'll find links to the episode along with the show notes. For now, thank you as always for joining us. I've been Matthew Walker, she has been Abbie Trayler-Smith, and you have been sensational. Until next time, take care.